My name is Martha, and I'm 72 years old. Our home is nestled right at the foot of the majestic Blue Ridge Mountains in the small town of Maple Creek, North Carolina. For the past 45 years, this has been my kingdom and my husband Walter's, a kingdom built from the smell of fresh pine in his woodshop, the aroma of my apple pies wafting from the kitchen, and the laughter of the two sons we once had. But lately, the quiet in this house has changed. It's no longer the peace of old age, but the heavy silence of unspoken secrets. Walter, my 75-year-old husband, the man whose rough hands could create furniture so fine folks called him a true artisan, had changed. He still sat for hours in his woodshop, but the sound of his woodplane wasn't steady and cheerful like it used to be. Instead, I'd often find him sitting silently amidst his blocks of wood, his eyes staring off into the misty mountainside, an invisible torment etched deep into his brow. Every morning, we'd still sit across from each other at the oak table he built with his own two hands 40 years ago. The steam from the hot coffee would rise, but it couldn't chase away the chill between us. I'd try to make small talk about the history books I was reading, about the sparrows chirping in the garden, but Walter would only respond with nods and little mumbles deep in his throat. His eyes, the same eyes that once looked at me with such tenderness, would always avoid mine now, as if he were hiding some terrible sin that only he knew. And it was in that suffocating silence that an idea popped into my head, an idea that seemed practical and responsible at our age, but would turn out to be the spark that lit a hellfire. "Walter, dear," I said one October morning, as the maple leaves outside the window were turning a fiery red, I think it's time we update our will." Walter jumped, dropping his spoon onto his plate with a clatter. He looked up at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw clear panic in his eyes. "The will? Why on earth are you bringing that up now?" "We're not getting any younger, you know that. Things need to be in order. For Ethan, for Brenda, and for the grandkids." I tried to keep my voice calm, but a vague sense of unease was creeping in. His reaction was just too much. He didn't sound like a husband discussing the future. He sounded like a guilty man who just heard the church bells call for him. It was right then that I knew this decision would change everything. But I could never have imagined that it wouldn't just change the future. It would also dig up a past I had always believed was perfect.
Mr. Abernathy's law office was on Main Street, old and dignified with floor-to-ceiling wooden bookshelves. Mr. Abernathy, an old family friend, greeted us with a kind smile. "Martha, Walter, good to see you both. You're both looking healthy as ever," he said while pouring us some tea. We sat down and I began to explain what I wanted to do. Everything was going smoothly until I mentioned one particular provision. "Mr. Abernathy, besides leaving the house and a portion of our savings to Ethan's family, we'd like to set aside a large portion, about half of our assets, to establish a trust fund." Mr. Abernathy nodded. "A fine idea. A trust for the grandchildren's education, I presume?" I took a deep breath. "Not exactly. We want to establish the Leo Black Memorial Trust Fund." The moment the name Leo left my lips, the air in the room seemed to thicken. Leo, our firstborn son, my pride and joy, had been lost in a tragic hiking accident on the cliffs 25 years ago, just after he turned 20. To me, Leo was the picture of perfection, smart, handsome, kind, and full of ambition. The pain of losing him never truly faded, and creating this fund was my way of keeping his name and his spirit alive. The fund would provide scholarships for talented, underprivileged students here in Maple Creek. Mr. Abernathy looked at me with sympathy. "I understand, Martha. That's a beautiful gesture." But when I turned to Walter, his face was white as a sheet. He was wringing his hands, his eyes glued to the floor. "Walter, what do you think?" I asked, trying to hide the irritation in my voice. He cleared his throat and stammered, I think we should talk about this more. Is this really necessary?" "Why wouldn't it be necessary?" I countered, my voice rising a bit. He was Ethan's brother. He was our son. Don't you want him to be remembered? It's not that, Walter said, quickly waving his hand. It's just, Ethan needs help too. His business, and Brenda has a lot on her plate. We should think of the living. His words were a knife in my heart. Think of the living? Did that mean Leo wasn't worthy of being remembered? Our little argument made Mr. Abernathy uncomfortable. Finally, with the decisiveness of a wife long accustomed to making the final call, I said, "Please include that provision, Mr. Abernathy. My husband is just a little emotional." Walter said nothing more. He was just silent, a silence that was heavier than 1,000 protests. At the time, I just thought he was sad, bringing up old memories. I was wrong. It wasn't sadness. It was fear.
2 days later, as they did every week, Ethan and Brenda brought the grandkids over for dinner. Ethan, my youngest, was a man who looked successful. He ran a small construction company, always wore sharp clothes, and knew all the right things to say. His wife Brenda was always sweet and thoughtful, calling me Mom and always helping me clear the table. On the surface, they were the perfect family. Dinner was cheerful, the sound of the grandkids' laughter warming the whole house. But I knew the bomb was about to drop. After the children had gone to the living room to watch TV, I cleared my throat. "Ethan, Brenda, your father and I have something to tell you." I calmly explained our decision to update the will, the portion of the assets for them, and finally, the Leo Memorial Trust. The smile vanished from Ethan's face. Brenda stopped cutting her slice of pie, her eyes narrowing. "A trust fund?" Ethan repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "What for, Mom? Leo's been gone a long time. Why stir all that up now?" "It's not stirring things up," I replied, trying to stay calm. "It's a memorial. I want to do something meaningful in your brother's name." Brenda set her fork down, smiling tactfully. "That's a lovely thought, Mom. But don't you think that money could be more helpful for the kids' future? Times are tough, and Ethan's company could really use some capital." Ethan picked up where she left off, a hint of frustration in his voice. "Let's be blunt. Do you not trust me? I'm your only son left. Everything should be passed down to me to manage and care for the family." He looked over at Walter, searching for an ally. "Dad, don't you think I'm right?" I held my breath, waiting for Walter's response. I expected him to defend me, to protect the memory of our lost son. But he didn't. Walter sighed, avoiding my gaze. He looked at Ethan with a complicated expression, a mixture of guilt and exhaustion. "Ethan, he has a point, dear. Maybe we should reconsider. Sometimes old folks can make emotional decisions." The ground fell out from under me. My husband wasn't just failing to support me. He was implying I was old and not thinking clearly. This betrayal hurt more than Ethan's greed. Ethan, feeling emboldened, pressed on. "I think maybe you should let us help more with managing your finances. Maybe even we could seek conservatorship over your assets. Not to take anything, of course, but to protect you from making poor decisions." "Conservatorship?" I almost screamed. "Do you think I've lost my mind?" The room was thick with tension. Brenda quickly tried to smooth things over. "Oh no, Mom. Ethan didn't mean it like that. We're just worried about your health. Well, it's getting late. We should be going." They left, leaving Walter and me sitting in silence, surrounded by half-eaten plates of pie and a crack that had just appeared between us, deep and impossible to mend. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. The image of Walter siding with Ethan haunted me. I turned over and saw he was wide awake too, staring at the ceiling. "Why, Walter?" I whispered into the darkness. "Why did you take his side? Why would you belittle me in front of our son and daughter-in-law?" Walter was silent for a long time. The crickets outside sounded so mournful. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse and weary. "I just think we owe him, Martha." "Owe him? What do we owe him?" I sat straight up. "We've given him everything, love and education, the capital to start his business. What else could we possibly owe him?" "We owe him for making things right," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Because, Leo, he was always the center of attention. Ethan had to live in his brother's very large shadow. We weren't fair to him." His reasoning felt so weak, so nonsensical. It was true Leo was a standout, but we never played favorites. A mother's love is always big enough for all her children. I felt a terrible distance from the man I'd shared the bed with for nearly half a century. He was hiding something from me, something to do with Leo, with Ethan, and with that fateful night 25 years ago. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, then lay back down, turning my back to him. Maybe you're right. Maybe I am just old and senile. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. I just felt a fear creeping into my heart. The family I had spent my whole life building, the perfect walls I had constructed, seemed to have serious cracks. And I was afraid that if I tried to find out why, the whole thing would come crashing down. A few days later, the tension in the house was still thick enough to cut with a knife. Then the phone rang. It was Ethan. I hesitated for a moment before answering. To my surprise, Ethan's voice on the other end was cheerful and sweet as can be. "Mom, it's me. I've been thinking a lot about our talk the other day. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. Brenda and I are just so worried about you and Dad." This 180-degree turn made me wary. "Is there something you need?" I asked, my voice cold. "Yes, I have an idea," he said, full of excitement. "I know things have been tense lately. How about this weekend, the whole family takes a picnic trip up the mountain? We could go to Craggy Pinnacle. Remember, Mom? The place you always said had the best view in the whole Blue Ridge? We can hike, take pictures, get some fresh air. Think of it as a way for us all to reconnect, okay?" Craggy Pinnacle. A beautiful name for a treacherous place. The trail leading to the summit was known for its sheer cliffs and the thick fog that could roll in during the afternoon. A mother's intuition, a woman's intuition after 72 years on this earth was screaming in my head, "Don't go. This is a trap." I hesitated. "Let me see. Your father hasn't been feeling well." "I already talked to Dad," Ethan interrupted cheerfully. "He agreed right away. He said we all need a trip like this to unwind." I glanced over at Walter, who was sitting in the corner pretending to read the paper, but I knew he was listening. He didn't look at me, just gave a slight nod of confirmation. Why? Why would he agree so easily? His face didn't look like he was looking forward to an outing. He looked like a man on death row walking his last mile. A chill ran down my spine. I was at a crossroads. Refuse, and they might find another way. Agree, and I would be walking straight into the trap they had set. But something compelled me to see it through. I had to know the truth. I had to know what Walter was hiding, and what Ethan really wanted from us. "All right," I replied, hearing my own voice sound distant and strange. "We'll go this weekend." After I hung up, I looked at Walter. "You know this isn't just a picnic, don't you?" Walter folded the newspaper, his hands trembling. He looked up at me, and in his old eyes, I saw a deep and profound despair. "I know," he whispered, "but sometimes, Martha, the only way out of a nightmare is to walk straight into it. Let's just treat it as a normal, relaxing trip. Everyone's been so stressed lately." And so we agreed to go on the last hike of our lives, on a trail leading to a place beautifully named Craggy Pinnacle, a name whose meaning I would later come to fully understand. It wasn't just a place. It was our destiny. The next few days passed in a suffocating charade. Ethan and Brenda dropped by almost daily, bringing homemade cookies and herbal tea, playing the part of devoted children trying to mend family ties. Every one of their smiles, every hug from Brenda felt to me as cold as the grim Reaper's embrace. On Friday afternoon, the day before the trip, Ethan brought over a brand new hiking backpack. He emptied it onto the floor, showing off ropes, safety clips, a professional-grade flashlight, and a large first aid kit. "I've prepared everything for a safe trip, Dad," he said to Walter, his voice thick with false pride. "At your age, safety is number one." Brenda pulled out an expensive digital camera. "I want to capture every special moment with our family," she said, smiling at me. "These will be photos we'll treasure forever." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the darkness of the living room, looking at the family photos on the wall. A picture of Walter and me on our wedding day. A picture of us holding our two beautiful baby boys, Leo and Ethan. In the photo, Ethan was looking at his older brother with an expression I once thought was admiration, but now, looking back, I saw envy in it, a simmering jealousy that had lasted a lifetime. Walter came out and sat beside me. He didn't say anything, just took my hand. His was ice cold and trembling. "We can't go. I have a bad feeling," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Ethan's changed too fast. And why Craggy Pinnacle? That place, it's so dangerous. We'll make up an excuse. I'll say I'm sick." Walter shook his head, his gaze fixed on the darkness outside. "If we cancel now, it will only make him angrier. He's cornered. We have to face him." He squeezed my hand, the tremor in his grip transferring to my whole body. I don't know what he's planning, but I know he'll pressure us, make demands, try to prove we're not of sound mind. I want to record everything. He pulled a small black object from his pocket. It wasn't some old thing. It was a modern, tiny digital voice recorder. "I bought this last week," he whispered. "I have a feeling things are coming to a head. We'll turn it on. So if anything happens, we'll have proof of our sanity, of what he really says, so he can't twist the truth." Saturday morning, the sky was cruelly blue. The bright sunshine seemed to mock the tragedy about to unfold. Ethan arrived to pick us up, whistling a cheerful tune. Brenda sat in the passenger seat, radiant in a pink tracksuit, looking more like she was heading to a resort than to carry out a murder plot. Their luxury SUV headed towards the Blue Ridge. Brenda put on some upbeat country music and sang along, occasionally turning to ask if we wanted a snack. Ethan drove with a suspicious amount of care, obeying every speed limit. He didn't want any risks to ruin his perfect plan. I sat in the back, leaning my head on Walter's shoulder. Outside the window, the autumn forests passed by like a slow-motion film, beautiful and sad. I tried to memorize every image, every color, as if it were the last time I would see them. Walter gently took my hand under the thin blanket. I felt a soft click. He had turned on the recorder. From this moment on, every word, every sound would be saved. About an hour later, the car turned onto the trail leading up to Craggy Pinnacle. The road became narrower and steeper, with a sheer rock face on one side and a deep gorge on the other. My heart pounded in my chest. We were approaching the final stage. "We're almost there," Brenda chirped. "Is everyone ready for an adventure?" I met Walter's eyes in the rearview mirror. In them, I saw my own reflection. A 72-year-old woman, her hair white, her face etched with the lines of time and worry, heading to what could be the end of her life. The trail was easy at first, winding through rhododendron bushes and moss-covered boulders. Brenda walked ahead, constantly exclaiming about the beauty of nature and raising her camera to take pictures. "Mom, look, the wildflowers are so pretty. Dad, stand over here, let me get a shot of you." Her performance was flawless. Ethan walked last, right behind Walter and me, claiming he was keeping an eye on you two. But I could feel his gaze fixed on the back of my neck, cold and calculating. Every time I turned, he would flash a gentle smile. "Are you two getting tired? Need to rest for a bit?" After about an hour of hiking, the path started to get steep. I was panting, my legs as heavy as lead. Walter was too, his forehead beaded with sweat. We were old, and they knew it. They had deliberately chosen a route that would drain our strength, leaving us weak and vulnerable. "Let's go this way," Brenda said suddenly, pointing to a small, less-traveled side path that looked far more dangerous than the main trail. "This path leads to a rock outcropping with a much better view than the main summit. I read about it online." A bald-faced lie. I knew this area well. That path didn't lead to any scenic overlook. It led to a dead-end cliff, a perfect place for an accidental slip. "That path looks a bit dangerous, dear," I tried to say, my voice trembling. "Maybe we should stick to the main trail." "Oh, it's just a short little detour, Mom," Ethan said, already starting down the path. "Come on, I promise it'll be spectacular." Finally, we reached a wide rock ledge with a sheer drop on 3 sides. The wind was strong up here, whipping through my hair, carrying the chill of the mountains. Below was a nearly vertical slope, but it was covered in a thick carpet of vegetation, dense thickets of wild rhododendron, thorny blackberry bushes, and young, crowded trees. The view truly was spectacular. From here, we could see the entire Maple Creek Valley spread out below us, tiny and distant. "Isn't it beautiful?" Brenda squealed, walking right to the edge. "Mom, Dad, come stand here so I can take a commemorative photo." Walter and I looked at each other, then slowly walked over. Each step felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I could see Ethan moving, quietly circling around behind us. He was choosing his spot, calculating the angle. "That's right, hug each other," Brenda directed, raising the camera. "Smile." Walter put his arm around me. This might be our last embrace. I could hear his heart beating wildly, in time with mine. The camera clicked. Snap, snap. Each sound like a hammer blow on the anvil of our fate. "Step back just a little bit more," Ethan said from behind us, "so we can get the whole valley in the shot." One more step back, and we'd be right on the edge of the abyss. "Ethan," Walter began, his voice hoarse, "stop this, son." "Stop?" Ethan chuckled, and when he spoke, all the sweetness was gone from his voice. "Don't you worry, it'll be fine. The picture will be much better if you just move back a little." And with that, he lunged. But Walter was ready for this moment. He had summoned all the strength of a 75-year-old man. Instead of being pushed back, he spun around, grabbed Ethan's wrist, and pulled him forward with all his might. Everything happened in an instant. Brenda screamed and rushed in, trying to pry Walter's hands off her husband. I lost my balance. All 4 of us, locked in a deadly embrace, teetered on the edge of the cliff. I felt the ground disappear from beneath my feet. I felt my body falling into empty space. The wind shrieked in my ears, our 4 screams merging into one as the rocky ground below rushed up to meet us with terrifying speed. In those brief seconds of falling, I didn't think about death. I thought about Leo. I thought about how he must have felt 25 years ago when he too was pushed from a cliff by his own brother. And then, a horrific impact, a pain that tore through my body, and darkness swallowed me whole. Pain pulled me from the darkness, a pain so intense I thought I would go mad. Every muscle, every bone in my body was screaming. I could feel blood trickling down my forehead, the metallic taste of it in my mouth. Was I dead? And then, through the hazy fog of agony, I heard a whisper, faint but clear, right next to my ear. "Martha, don't move. Play dead." It was Walter's voice. He was alive, and so was I. Somehow, a superhuman strength rose up in me. I lay perfectly still, holding my breath, forcing my pain-racked body not to tremble. Through a narrow slit of my eyelid, I saw Ethan and Brenda crawling to their feet a short distance away. They had survived too, but they seemed more badly injured than we were. Brenda's leg was bent at an unnatural angle. Ethan was clutching his arm, his face twisted in pain. I heard Ethan groan. "Brenda, are you okay?" My leg, I think it's broken, Brenda sobbed. What about them, the old folks? The way she said it, the old folks, confirmed everything. We had never been family to her. I held my breath as Ethan limped towards us. My heart hammered against my ribs. He's going to finish us. I was sure of it. He bent down, looked at Walter, then at me. A few seconds of silence stretched into an eternity. "They're gone," he finally declared, his voice tinged with relief. "Neither of them is breathing." His lie saved our lives. "Good," Brenda whispered, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "The plan worked, except for the part where we fell too." She let out a bitter laugh. "At least now we don't have to pretend to love them anymore." For the next few minutes, Walter and I lay there, playing dead, listening as those two monsters discussed their next move. They would crawl for help, tell a story of a tragic accident, of how they bravely tried to save their parents but failed, and how they had miraculously survived. When their voices faded into the distance behind the rocks, Walter finally dared to whisper, his voice broken with pain. "Martha, did you hear that?" "I heard it," I whispered back, tears finally starting to flow, mixing with the blood on my face. I heard everything. We were alive. We had proof. But we were trapped at the bottom of a ravine, badly injured, with no way to contact the outside world. The nightmare wasn't over. It had just begun a new chapter, one even more terrifying than the fall itself. Silence settled over the bottom of the gorge. There was only the sound of the wind whistling through the rocks and the ragged breaths of two old people clinging to life. The physical pain was excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the agony tearing my soul apart. My son, my daughter-in-law. They had tried to kill us, and they thought they had succeeded. "Walter," I whispered, my throat dry. "The recorder, is it still there?" "It's here," he replied, his voice faint, "still in my pocket. It recorded everything." A flicker of hope. But we were still here, at the bottom of a cliff. "Walter," I said, a powerful urge rising within me, "before it's too late, I need you to tell me the truth. Why did you hesitate about the will? Why were you so afraid?" Walter let out a long, shaky breath, as if a great weight had just been placed upon him. "That night," he began, his voice cracking, "I caught Leo in the woodshop. He wasn't working. He was prying open my safe. He confessed everything, Martha. He had a gambling addiction. He was in a massive amount of debt. He'd been stealing our savings for months to pay it off. He begged me not to tell you. He was afraid it would destroy you." Every word from Walter was a hammer blow to my perfect memory of Leo. My golden boy? A gambler? A thief? "I was so angry," Walter continued, tears tracing paths through the dirt on his face. "I called him a disgrace. I told him he was no son of mine. I told him to get out," he sobbed. And then Ethan showed up. He'd heard everything. He ran after Leo to try and talk him down. I didn't follow them, Martha. My stupid fatherly pride kept me there. It was the biggest mistake of my life. "So what happened on the cliff?" I asked, my heart clenching. "A few weeks ago, I went down to the workshop late to finish that cabinet for the church, and I heard Ethan and Brenda talking. They thought I'd already gone home. They were in their car, right outside the open workshop window, and I heard everything." He paused, a sob catching in his throat. "I heard Brenda ask Ethan if he ever regretted Leo's accident. And Ethan, our son, he laughed. He said his only regret was not doing it sooner. He said Leo didn't slip, he pushed him." My heart stopped. The sky above me felt like it was crashing down for a second time. And that's not all, Walter went on, his voice full of pain. They talked about how Leo was destroying himself. Not just gambling, Martha. He was into drugs and some shady business dealings. Ethan said he pushed Leo to save the family from ruin, to protect the good name I'd built my whole life. Now I understood. Walter wasn't tormented by the past. He was paralyzed by the truth of the present. He knew his younger son was a murderer, and his older son had been a lost cause. I didn't know what to do, he confessed. Tell you the truth and watch you completely fall apart? And the Leo Memorial Fund, how could I agree to honor a son like that? But how could I refuse without revealing that I knew Ethan's secret? I was trapped, Martha. I was trapped between my two dead sons, one in body, one in soul. The truth was finally out, more horrific than I could have ever imagined. Just then, we heard voices calling from above, mixed with the chopping sound of a helicopter. It was time for us to give the performance of our lives. The rescue was a hazy nightmare. I felt myself being strapped to a stretcher, hoisted into the air. I kept my body limp, my eyes shut, my breathing so shallow it was almost undetectable. I could hear Brenda's dramatic sobs and Ethan telling the rescue workers their fabricated story with a perfectly grief-stricken voice. My father slipped. My mother tried to grab him. We tried to save them, but it was ridiculous. A flawless performance, down to the last detail. At the hospital, it was chaos. Doctors and nurses swarmed around us. I was taken to a private emergency room. I heard snatches of medical jargon, head trauma, internal bleeding, critical condition. I had to keep up the act, but I also had to find a way to send a signal. A young nurse named Enos was assigned to monitor my vitals. She had an intelligent face and observant eyes. As she was checking my pulse, I summoned every ounce of strength I had and twitched my index finger once. A tiny movement, almost imperceptible. But Enos noticed. I saw her pause for a fraction of a second, her eyes widening. She glanced towards the door, then leaned in close to my ear, pretending to check my breathing tube. "Can you hear me?" she whispered. "If you can, move your finger again." I did. "Oh, dear Lord," she breathed. "You're faking it." She straightened up, her expression unchanged, and went about her duties. A few minutes later, when we were alone, she leaned in again. "The people you were with, did they do this to you? Move your finger twice for yes." I moved my finger twice. Horror flashed across Enos's face, but she quickly composed herself. "Keep doing what you're doing. I'll find a way to help." A few minutes later, when we were alone, she leaned in again. "The people you were with, did they do this to you? Move your finger twice." I moved my finger twice. Horror flashed across Enos's face, but she quickly composed herself. "Keep doing what you're doing. I'll find a way to help." That young nurse became my only ray of hope. Soon after, the door opened. Ethan and Brenda walked in, their faces grim, their eyes red. The show went on. "Oh, Mom," Ethan said, taking my limp hand. "Please forgive me. I should have been more careful." Brenda sobbed by the bedside. "You have to fight, Mom. We're all waiting for you. The grandkids are waiting." But then, Ethan leaned in close to my ear, close enough for me to feel his cold breath. He whispered, a whisper meant only for me, a whisper he thought would be buried with me. "I hope you've learned your lesson. You never should have gone digging into the past. Some truths are better left buried, just like Leo." A single hot tear rolled from the corner of my closed eye. It wasn't a tear of pain, but of rage. My son had just confessed everything, and he had no idea that, in the corner of the room, Nurse Enos, pretending to check a machine, had heard every single word. Her eyes were wide with terror. As soon as Ethan and Brenda left, Enos took action. She reported what she'd heard to the head of her department, and together they called the police. 2 detectives, an older man named Johnson, and a younger woman were in my hospital room in less than an hour. Enos stood by my side. "Mrs. Black," Detective Johnson said, his voice low and reassuring, "Nurse Enos has told us everything. You're safe now. If you can, please open your eyes." I slowly opened my eyes. The fluorescent lights were blinding, but the first thing I saw was Enos's relieved face. My voice was hoarse and weak, but I told them everything about the trust fund, Walter's strange behavior, the fateful trip, and what I'd overheard at the bottom of the gorge. "My husband," I said, "he has a voice recorder. The proof is on there." Detective Johnson immediately sent an officer to Walter's room. Thankfully, he had also regained consciousness. Walter shakily handed the pen recorder to the officer. "It's all in here," he whispered. Detective Johnson plugged the recorder into a special device. We all held our breath and listened. The recording was disappointing. The sound of the wind drowned out most of the conversation. Then came the screams and the chaotic sounds of the fall. The audio was garbled, distorted, with long stretches of silence. We could faintly make out Brenda saying, "They're gone too," and her bitter laugh. But Ethan's crucial line about not having to pretend to love them anymore was lost in a burst of static. Detective Johnson sighed. "It's something, but it's not a smoking gun. The words are unclear. Their lawyer could argue it was said in a state of panic. We need a clearer confession. We need them to admit it themselves." I looked at Walter. Our only hope had just fizzled out. But then an idea sparked in my mind. A risky idea, but maybe the only way. "We'll give them what they want," I said, my voice weak but determined. "We'll give them a chance to expose themselves." At our request, a nurse called Ethan and Brenda. We told them we felt weak, that we didn't have much time left, and wanted to settle the will once and for all. Ethan and Brenda entered the room where Walter and I lay in adjacent beds, hooked up to a mess of wires. Their faces were etched with fake concern, but their eyes couldn't hide their impatience. "Dad, Mom," Ethan began, "don't talk like that. You're going to get better." "Time waits for no one, son," I replied, my voice a mere whisper. "We've made a decision. We need to speak to the lawyer right away." I signaled to Walter. Walter took a breath and looked his son straight in the eye. "Your mother and I have decided to keep the will as we originally planned. The Leo Black Memorial Trust Fund will be established." The air in the room froze. The smiles on Ethan and Brenda's faces vanished. "What?" Ethan practically shouted, forgetting his act entirely. "Keep it? After all this? You still want to honor someone like him?" "What do you mean by that?" I asked, my voice trembling, though my heart was pounding.
"What do I mean?" Ethan laughed, a crazed sound. "Do you have any idea who Leo really was? An addict, a gambler, a drug dealer. I saved this family from him. I stopped a catastrophe. I pushed him to stop him from destroying all of us. And this is how you repay me? With a trust fund for a deadbeat?" He stepped closer to my bed, his eyes red with fury. "For 25 years, how have I lived? In his shadow. Since the day he died, have you ever really looked at me? Or did you just see the empty space he left behind? Did you ever really care about me, other than to give me money? I figured if I couldn't have your love, I should at least have your money. It's what you owe me for everything I endured." Brenda stepped up beside her husband, her voice sharp as a razor. "He's right. He's lived with fear and insecurity for so many years. He tried. He built a career. He proved himself. But in your eyes, he was never as good as a dead good-for-nothing. That trust fund, it was the last straw. You drove us to this." Hearing those words, my own tears began to flow, not of fear, but of regret. My God, he was right. We had been so wrong. We had been so lost in our grief for Leo that we had unintentionally abandoned our other son. "I'm sorry, Ethan," I sobbed. "We are so sorry. We were wrong, son. We should have loved you more." Walter was crying too. "I'm sorry, son." But then I took a deep breath and looked him straight in the eye. "But murder is still murder. Our pain is no excuse for your crime. Whatever the motive, your actions were against the law, and they must be punished. The moment I finished speaking, the hospital room door burst open. Detective Johnson and several police officers rushed in. Ethan Black, Brenda Black, you are under arrest. Ethan and Brenda stood frozen in stunned horror. They looked at us, then at the police, realizing they had walked right into a trap. As an officer handcuffed Ethan, he looked back at us. Our apology seemed to have touched some hidden corner of his soul. The rage was gone, replaced by an empty void. He turned away, and I saw his shoulders shake. A single, belated tear fell. Walter and I looked at each other across the space between our beds, our eyes filled with tears. We had found justice for Leo, but we had lost Ethan forever. Our perfect family, in the end, was nothing but a tragedy. The trial took place 6 months later. With the confession recorded by the police right there on the hospital, the case was airtight. Brenda tried to pin all the blame on her husband, but it was no use. Ethan, on the other hand, barely put up a fight. He stood before the court and accepted every charge with a chilling resignation. They were both sentenced to life in prison for murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Walter, for concealing the truth about his son's actions all those years ago, also received a suspended sentence and many hours of community service. The law had delivered its justice, but the justice of the law cannot heal the wounds of the heart. Returning to our home in Maple Creek, everything looked the same, but it was all different. The house now felt like a silent witness to the tragedy of the very people who built it. For the first few nights, the silence was almost unbearable. But then, slowly, Walter and I started to talk. "We were wrong, Martha," Walter said one evening as we sat on the porch looking out at the now somber Blue Ridge Mountains. "We were wrong to turn Leo into a saint in our memories, and in doing so, we accidentally turned Ethan into a ghost in his own life." And I knew he was right. Our grief had blinded us. It made us cling to an idealized image that wasn't real, and in the process, we pushed our living son away. The Leo Black Memorial Trust Fund was still established, but we changed its purpose entirely. It's now called the Maple Creek Hope Fund. It's not meant to honor a name, but to fund counseling programs, to help troubled children, children who feel forgotten, children living in the long shadow of a sibling. We wanted to turn our family's tragedy into a lesson, a small salvation for other families. We sold the wood shop and the big house. We moved into a smaller home on the edge of town. Walter doesn't do woodwork anymore. Instead, he spends his time fixing furniture for free for the elderly and lonely. As for me, I started volunteering at the local library, reading stories to the children. We found a new kind of peace in giving back, as a way to atone for the mistakes we, however unintentionally, helped create. We haven't visited Ethan in prison yet. Maybe one day we will. Maybe not. Forgiveness is a long and rocky road, and we've only just taken the first few steps. That tear he shed in the hospital room that day, I'll never forget it. It doesn't erase his crimes, but it showed me that the monster inside him was, in the end, just a wounded child crying out to be seen.
Family isn't some perfect picture you hang on the wall, my friends. It's a garden. It needs to be tended to every single day with understanding, with forgiveness, and with honest words, no matter how hard they are to hear. Because if you don't, the weeds of resentment and secrecy will grow, and one day they'll choke out even the most beautiful flowers. I have lost both of my sons, one in body, one in soul. But in the ashes of my family's tragedy, I found the truth. And sometimes, the truth, no matter how painful, is the only seed from which a new beginning can grow.